I'm Richard Dobson. I work for the Energy Systems Catapult, which is a slightly odd name for an organisation, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. And this talks all about how we can use data to better decarbonise the energy sector in the UK, but also more broadly. Okay. So, what is the Energy Systems Catapult is a good place to start because we're a bit of an odd entity. So essentially, we are an organisation that was set up by the government. So we are supported with a core grant from Innovate UK that helps us to exist, but we're a not-for-profit innovation organisation. So we have hubs in Birmingham and Derby, and really we sit in the middle of kind of academic worlds and research, but also industry. So we're really trying to bridge the gap between different stakeholders in the sector, bring them together, and really try and create the best, bring together the best minds on topics to really solve some of the most difficult problems, of which decarbonisation is one. So the Catapult itself, we support innovators, we conduct new primary research, we run trials with both digital systems and more broadly. We have lots of system engineering capabilities, we run models and simulations, and the area that I sit in is digital. So the reason we have a digital practice within the Energy Systems Catapult is because energy systems have been created and developed for many years now. They are very robust, they are very kind of hardcore engineering, and there is a huge opportunity to make them more efficient, make them cleaner, make them just work better for customers through introduction of more and more digital technologies and undertaking digital transformation. But beyond just digital transformation, there's a huge amount of value that actually sits in the data that's already being collected, and that's kind of where my focus ends up lying. So because I'm assuming that not all of you are going to be from the energy sector, and there may well be some people who this is the first time they're thinking about energy, I thought I'd do a very high-level introduction to kind of where we are and what the goals are within the energy sector and the UK more broadly. So the UK has to decarbonise, and really quite quickly. So last year, just as Theresa May was leaving office, the UK became the first major economy to pass a net zero emissions law. So this means that we have a legally binding target that we will bring all greenhouse gases to a net zero amount by 2050. So what we mean by that is that any emissions that still exist at 2050 will have to be offset by planting trees, using technology like carbon capture and storage. But in general, it means we have to massively cut carbon emissions over the next few years, and we're on quite a tight schedule to actually be able to achieve that. So there's been a huge amount of modelling and analysis that's actually looked at how widespread the challenges are, because whilst my focus is energy systems and delivering energy to consumers, this net zero is actually economy-wide. So there are many societal and behavioural changes that are needed across diet, travel, waste. And in general, fossil fuels need to be removed wherever possible. So that means mass electrification of transport, and heating is essential. So not just the petrol you put in your car, but also the gas you use to heat your house at the moment, or likely used to heat your house at the moment, needs to be removed as far as physically possible, and the remaining residual needs to be mitigated. So that's a huge task. But obviously, if we're electrifying transport and heating, that also means that electricity needs to be zero carbon, which means we're going to be relying a lot more on renewable generation and zero carbon generation like nuclear. So if I move on to the next slide now. So as a bit of a primer for those of you who aren't part of the energy sector, the electricity system in the UK has a transmission backbone, which is shown on this this map of GB here, that's delivered by National Grid. That is the large cables you see when you're driving down the motorways. They transmit very high voltage energy from one point of the country to another. That's the transmission level here. Now we have lots of generation that's connected to the transmission level, lots of large scale energy storage, both gas and electricity. And that's traditionally how the system has worked. We've had lots of very large scale energy generators that sit and connect to the transmission network. We also have interconnectors, so they're obviously interconnectors with other countries, so the Netherlands, France, across to Germany, that sort of area. So we have other ways of importing and exporting energy from the transmission network, but traditionally it was all at this level. But actually, to get energy all the way down to consumers, we use distribution networks, which are providing the cables that actually get to your house. And as we've seen a huge shift towards renewable energy, we've also seen a massive shift towards distribution and level generation and storage. So if you think about all of the solar panels that are on top of people's houses, but also the solar panel farms that you might see as you drive down the motorway, or the wind farms that are dotted throughout the country, a lot of those will be connected at distribution level. So what we're starting to see is a massive shift away from a small number of assets at transmission level to a huge number of assets that are at distribution level and on individual consumers' houses, potentially with clever batteries or electric vehicles that are also sitting there. So all of this is kind of the physical system. And then we have, at the moment, we have one system operator for electricity and one for gas. And they sit and they control the system where they are essentially trying to make sure it is always balanced. Generation is always balanced with demand. The computer scientists among you will notice that this is obviously it's going to be a graph problem. It's going to be trying to balance all of the weights on the edges. It's essentially a really cool optimization problem, and it's getting more difficult by the day. So just to kind of illustrate that, so within electricity, we have to balance the system. So generation always has to match demand. So if you turn on your light, there has to be more energy there for you to be able to use it. Otherwise, the system starts to get unstable, and eventually that causes outages. Like last August, we saw lots of outages, particularly taking out the trains and hospitals and things like that. It was quite a big event. Traditionally, this has been quite it's been a challenging thing to balance the energy system, but it's all been done at quite a centralized way. There's been a control center in Wokingham, a small team that's been able to say, turn that power station on, turn that one down. But as we get more and more weather-dependent renewables, which are naturally going to be intermittent, solar panels will only generate when there's sun, and wind will only generate when there's wind. And this means that they're not dispatchable in the same way that a coal-fired power station will be. You can't turn it up and turn it down. It's just on, and you have to deal with what comes out of the back of it. So if you think that you've got, we're always trying to balance these two things, supply and demand. If the supply is now no longer controllable to the same degree it was, then we have to look for another way to manage that relationship between supply and demand. So essentially that means that we're looking more towards flexibility on the consumer side and on the domestic side. Is there anything that you can control and turn up and turn down to make the equation balance? And if not, are there any large any ways of storing energy within the system? And that's why we're starting to see the likes of Tesla deploying huge battery arrays. They did that quite famously in Australia. They deployed a very large battery array because they were experiencing a lot of instability in the area. So we're starting to get to an even more complicated problem. So really, to solve it, you've got to understand, what does the network look like? What does the generation capacity look like within the system? What does the storage and flexibility capacity look like? How much can it, what is it currently doing? Is it importing, exporting? Could it provide more output or more input to help balance the system? And also you have to be able to predict what's the current, or what you have to know what is the current demand and predict what future demand might look like. So this is all quite a complicated problem. But it gets even more complicated when you actually put the data layer on top of that, because there's not just one network in the UK, there are tens of networks. There are thousands of large generators, but there are millions of small generators with solar panels on their roofs. There are thousands of storage and flexibility providers, and there are tens of millions of demand creators, from businesses to individuals. So this is a huge data problem of how do you manage to share that data with the right people in the right way so that the system doesn't just trip over. And equally, is it even possible to manage this from a centralized point of view anymore when you've got millions and millions, billions of data points that you're trying to balance instantaneously when data is inherently going to be slower than electricity? So it's a real challenge, and it's something that we think, or within my team at least, we think is really a problem that digital and data can actually help to solve. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last few years is running the Energy Data Task Force. So this was a government-initiated group that was created by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, along with Ofgem, and Innovate UK is the innovation agency. So this was chaired by Laura Sands, who's an ex-MP, but also a very big advocate of the energy system, and she does lots of great work on flexibility and really trying to bring the energy system into the 21st century. And Laura worked with us at the Energy Systems Catapult to develop a strategy for how we can take this forwards. We started in October 2018, and we had an impossibly short timescale and a very big number of stakeholders to engage with. So we ended up talking to over 300 different companies about what they thought was necessary to help create a modern digitalized energy system. And then we produced this report with 5 key recommendations. So the end goal that we were aiming for was a modern digitalized energy system, something that delivers better outcomes for consumers by making sure that we really use the assets that we're paying for. So collectively, we all pay for the energy system, all the networks, all the generation assets, all of the meter points. We're all paying for it through our energy bills and some taxes, essentially. So it's really important that we make sure that every time we invest in things, it's valued and we get the maximum back from it. We also wanted to show that we also wanted to make sure that we were able to get greater price discovery. So understanding which areas are driving costs disproportionately. So, is serving a small town in northern Scotland going to cost the same as serving a customer in London? No, not at all. And it's important we understand where those discrepancies are, because that enables you to target investment in the right ways and not assume that one size fits all. But we also wanted to attract new productive assets to the system, new innovators, create new jobs, and create a more dynamic energy system. But there are really 2 big things that were stopping that. The first one is that there are a huge amount of gaps. So there are data gaps. So when I was talking about the networks and being able to understand what the networks look like earlier, at a transmission level, we have a really good view of what the network is. At a kind of medium voltage level, which doesn't really mean anything when I say that, but essentially means the higher capacity distribution cables, we have a pretty good view of those as well. But actually, when it comes down to the streets of the cables that run under your feet and actually get to your house, we generally know where they are in a paper-based format. There's probably a filing cabinet somewhere that's got a nice drawing in it. In some areas, that will be a digital map, not in all areas by any means. So that's a real challenge, that it's just a data set that needs to be created that just doesn't exist ubiquitously at the moment. But there's loads of areas where that's happening, and that can really only be addressed by the organisations that manage those assets. They need to create those data sets. But it's not a one-off thing. We can't just create a data set of a digital map and then say we're done. it's about continuously improving that and increasing the granularity of it, improving the quality and the accuracy of that data, and making sure that that's moving forwards, but also about improving the skills in the sector. The energy sector is blessed to have many very, very good engineers, lots of brilliant engineers that make it one of the most stable, secure energy systems in the world. But they're not necessarily data people or digital people. And when you're on the journey of digital transformation, that's a real gap in the workforce, and not just in a kind of a data team or a data systems team or a data science team. It's about having data literacy much more ubiquitously through the sector, because that's the only way we're going to make this more efficient and work towards the goal that we need to. And then finally, we've really advocated the creation of digital strategies, because the companies in the energy sector generally have a business strategy, and then they might have an IT strategy somewhere, but that doesn't really work, because you really need to bring them together. And we've seen a lot of leadership from Ofgem over the last few months asking companies to start developing these and submitting them for vetting, and we're really starting to see that. They are not all perfect, and they're not going to be, because the companies that are producing these strategies haven't been doing it for very long, but they're at least moving in the right direction. On the other side, so we've got lots of gaps in the data, but we also have lots of really valuable, great data sources that exist. But they're often fragmented. They're often, so if you wanted to understand what the networks look like in the UK, you would have to go to 13 different companies, and then probably about 20 or 30 more smaller independent networks. You know, the data is very, very fragmented, and not always in a way that's logical to a potential data user. So we have so many segments and so many silos where data sits, but data's not flowing between them, and that means you end up with idiosyncrasies and inefficiencies that just don't make sense. So off the back of that, we're considering this is a national asset. The energy system is a national asset that we all benefit from. So really, we should treat this like a national asset and assume that the data about it, given that we're all paying for it, really should be presumed open. And by that, we don't mean that all data has to be open and available for anyone, because I'm sure there'll be some of you thinking that sounds like a security nightmare, and it would be. But it means that we should at least start from the point of openness and work out why it might not be sensible to share the data, rather than trying to always justify why can I incrementally share this little bit more data, because that's a real challenge. That's something that doesn't work really in any sector. But even if you have open data, it's not good enough if you can't find it. You can't search for similar data sets across different organizations, and you can't understand it if you actually get hold of it. Equally, if I've got data from 20 different organizations and it's all in a different format and structure, I'm sure you all understand the pain there, that doesn't work for an innovator. It doesn't work for anyone who's trying to work across organizations. And finally, when we're talking about open data, obviously we need to have security in mind and make sure that we're not creating incremental risk. But we also need to acknowledge that there is a resilience benefit by having a much better, more consolidated knowledge of what the systems look like. There was a power outage in, I believe it was the King's Cross area of London, because there was a lot of development going on, and it took a huge amount of time to actually diagnose where the problem was, because the data hadn't been updated effectively, and it just created a massive treasure hunt for the technicians trying to work out where the issues were, and the engineers involved in the diagnosis. So, you know, having better data will increase our resilience and our ability to bounce back when things do happen. We also recommended a few building block projects that I won't talk about in detail, but essentially we were talking about creating a catalogue of where data is, because if you don't know where the data is, it's really hard to get access to it, even if it's open. And innovators are finding that every day. An asset registration strategy, because there are many ways that you might want to register an asset. So a solar panel you might want to know where that is if you're the supplier, because you want to pay the export tariff for the energy that's created off that. But also, what if I'm the system operator? I probably want to know about their data as well. And what if I'm an innovator trying to balance a local energy system? You know, there are lots of reasons why you might want the same data, and it's being recollected each time currently. And then finally, we recommended the creation of a digital system map, because essentially as an integration and interoperability project, let's say if we just take all of the data about, all of the mapping data about our networks, is it even possible to bring it all together in its current form, or is there a huge amount of underlying work that needs to take place? So I'm going to skip over these slides because in my true fashion, I've already talked through both of those. So now we made these recommendations and they went down really well. We got lots of pats on the back, and that's brilliant, that's great. And then the companies that were actually asked to implement it said, we would like a little bit more practical advice about how we can do this. So we've come back in to work with Ofgem and BEIS and Innovate UK and develop some energy data best practice guidance. So essentially, what this is if you're a data custodian, a data holder in the energy sector, what should I actually be doing? What is best practice? What should be considered the gold standard? And how can I do the right thing if that's what I'm trying to do? So we've developed this this guide. Essentially, it's in development, as all of these things are. It's constantly going to be moving until Ofgem actually publish it as an official document. It will continue to develop and evolve, and you can find it on this open Confluence space here, this modernising energy data Confluence space. This is a private version at the moment, but this will be launched again, but there is a public version up. And essentially what we've got is a set of descriptions of actions that organisations could be taking that would mean they would really start to be embodying best practice and really delivering the recommendations of the task force. So we've got a principle, which is kind of one-line account of what the action actually is. That's followed by a description of the principle, so where we've needed to define things or clarify things, we've put it in there. And then we followed that up with techniques. So if this is kind of the principles-based bit, this is the bit that says, here is the outcome we want, this is what we're trying to achieve. This actually says, if you're an organisation with data, this is what you could do. And then we've got some worked examples just to actually kind of make it real. So I think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to run through all of this in a huge amount of detail, but essentially we've boiled it down to kind of 12 points. And it goes right from kind of the real basic data hygiene stuff of identifying the roles of your stakeholders and using common terms within your data, metadata and supporting information, through to strategies to make data sets discoverable for potential users. So, you know, not just sitting on your data set and saying, well, if anyone wants to use it, they can come and ask me. That doesn't really work. And embedding, using these research and understanding what the data users actually want from energy system data. We are potentially a sector that is kind of a bit inward looking traditionally. You know, we think about what do we need as as the energy sector. We are trying to deliver this really robust system, but actually as you have more and more EVs and air source heat pumps and smart cities, you know, there's a huge amount of interplay between different sectors and different areas. So it's important that, oh, there we go. It's important that we're actually understanding what are the users' needs about our data as well. In addition, we want to make sure that people are storing and archiving data in a way that actually maximizes the value of it. It's really important to, I'm not sure if you can still see my slides, but my laptop is doing some odd things here.
We can see them.
Okay, great. Well, that's fine. I'll guess what's on them. Okay, so yes, we want to make sure that people are storing and archiving data in a way that maximizes its value. Traditionally, because we have a very fragmented sector, people will collect data, they'll use it, and then when it's of no use to them, they'll get rid of it. But when you have at least 10 organizations involved in the chain from generation to consumption of electricity, actually any one of those other 9 organizations might have found that data absolutely invaluable. So we need to make sure that we're not just throwing really useful stuff away. And then finally, we've developed a bit of a process, an open data triage process that helps people to implement the presumed open principle. And that's really about working through and trying to identify what are the potential issues with sharing this data set. Where might the gotchas be? What mitigation techniques could I use to get around those issues? So, we all know GDPR's a challenge if you're trying to share personal data, but what techniques can you use to mitigate personal data issues? Aggregation's the one that always comes to mind and is used very commonly, but there are lots of different things that could be used in that area, and equally for security and commercial sensitivity and anything that might create a negative consumer impact. There's always a way to think around a problem and mitigate the data or mitigate the issue so that some useful data could still be shared. So essentially we're trying to get away from the can I share the data, yes or no, to what can I share, which is a much more interesting question, I think. Okay, so can I just check that my slides have moved on there?
So
I'm seeing the. Sorry, go ahead, Julian.
Yeah, at the moment we're just seeing your normal PowerPoint thing, not the presentation. So I think either you've swapped focus on your screens or something like that.
Yeah.
That looks good. Opportunities,
okay,
yeah, that's
cool.
what we want.
Okay, cool. Right, so I guess I wanted to take the chance whilst I was speaking to a group of data experts and data management experts particularly, to kind of put a call out for net zero is an absolutely huge challenge. And it's something that we're only going to be able to do with lots of very widespread transformation across the energy sector. There are lots of people shouting at the minute we should be bringing net zero forward to 2025 to 2030. I think the modelling that's been done in the Energy Systems Catapult says that even with the wind going in the right direction and lots of speculative innovation, we could do it by 2045. It's that hard a problem. You just can't do it overnight. It's just not possible. So if we're going to get there needs to be a huge amount more innovation, a huge amount more data innovation particularly. And really the energy sector needs digital and data expertise and skills. So there are lots of opportunities for both individuals and companies with expertise in data management, data engineering, data science, data wrangling in general. Any kind of data or digitalization skills are desperately needed in the sector. And there's a real opportunity to come and help shape things and help us hit these net zero targets. But beyond that, net zero is a cross-sector challenge. We have to decarbonise transport and agriculture and aviation in all parts of our system. So, it's really important that, whichever sector that you're in, you might be able to help the drive for net zero by utilising or providing data to help the cause. So that might mean if you're working in the automotive sector, there is a way that you can utilise energy system data to help your EV drivers charge up their cars at the most efficient time, reducing the carbon that they're emitting as they're driving and optimising things. But it also might mean that, if you're helping a supermarket work out how to best manage their data systems, there's a huge amount of data that they can provide back to the system that would be incredibly useful to understand flows of people and when the fridge doors are going to be open and when the freezers are going to be open and closed, how you cycle them. There's lots of ways that everyone can help towards the net zero target. And I think we're seeing over the last year or over 2020, with the forest fires in Australia and now coronavirus we're not really in the business as usual state anymore, are we? Things are changing. So, if you're interested in helping or innovating or just using your skills, please get in touch with me or the Catapult in general, or there are lots of interesting opportunities in this area. So that's my slides. So thank you very much for listening. Yeah, I'm Richard Dobson. That's my email. You could probably guess that anyway. But if you're interested to talk about any of this further, or you want to just have a chat about potential opportunities, then do drop me an email and let me know. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Richard. That was really interesting. I think that could lead to a whole host of interesting questions coming through. We've already got a few that if people have typed in into the question box there, but I think I'll start with one which might be relatively uncontroversial. Well, let's start anyway. So in terms of the smart meter rollout, which is obviously crawling along at the moment, is all the data that smart meters are going to be providing, is that going to be a massive challenge or a massive opportunity, or somewhere between the two?
So the smart meter rollout has been a challenge, and we are where we are with it, I guess. So I won't comment on the approach taken. We'll leave it at that. But in terms of actually what's happening now, there is a data communications company that has been set up that is now helping to coordinate the collection of data. The real challenge is that they don't store all the data in a central location. Smart meter data is only ever stored on the meters for 13 months, and then it's stored by the suppliers for the purposes that they have. Networks are technically allowed to get access, but it's a challenge to get access at the moment, and there are a few reasons why. There was some regulation that was created that said you must aggregate the data. And that kind of limits its value a little bit, but I think we're starting to see signs that things like that might change in the future as the value of data is seen to increase. But also the innovators are getting much smarter about how they work with smart meter data. So we're seeing lots of people using consumer access devices that kind of hook into the smart meter in the home and can deliver much greater granularity of data, like second by second data, what's 10 second by 10 second at the moment, which is much more granular and much more valuable. So there is a huge amount of value in that data, particularly if you've got solar panels on your roof or batteries or EV. There's a huge amount of value in it. I don't think it's unlocked just yet, but I think it could be. There's potential.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So real potential there. Okay, there's a question that one person has raised, and there's at least one more in the audience who will probably be asking the same kind of question. Is there not a need for a rigorous ontology rather than a data catalogue?
So, yeah, I mean, an ontology would be brilliant. So we've been working with the DFTG, the Digital Framework Task Group, who are obviously interested in creating an ontology for all of the built environment, and I think it is an absolutely admirable thing to be aiming for. But it is long term. It's something that we won't achieve for a long while. And actually, to get it right, you don't want to do that sort of stuff too quickly. Otherwise, you end up unpicking it for years. We could say smart meters again at this point. But so the way we've tried to approach it is really kind of a very pragmatic and very let's just take the baby steps we can and actually start to see incremental value and create incremental value. The organizations that are collecting and storing this data at the moment don't necessarily have the skills to do wholesale transformation to get the data into a format that actually complies with an ontology, even if it existed. The closest thing we've got in terms of a data standard is the Common Information Model that helps to describe electricity networks. And that is starting to gain traction now, but I'm working with a company that's trying to do a transformation and a switch over to that now. I'm not directly working on that project, but I know it's a big team effort to actually make it happen. So, there's a lot going on there, and it is a big challenge to try and try and create an ontology and apply it. So yeah, it would be incredible. It would be great. It's so valuable. And from a data science perspective, it would unlock countless opportunities, but it's not going to happen soon, and we can't wait, essentially.
Yeah, okay, so follow-on question from that really is in terms of the fact that potentially other industries, other sectors may have already tackled some of these problems. So have there been much sort of horizon scanning to see what's already happened and what's been done by other industries that might be able to be reusable in this sector?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we, thankfully, energy isn't the first one to try and tackle this, and lots of other organisations and sectors have had to. My background was telecoms, as was my CTOs and my direct line managers. You know, there's a lot of analogies across from there. Taking an analog network and trying to digitalise it and improve the data models. It did take an awfully long time, and the standardisation process in telecoms has its flaws, but ultimately we all have mobile phones that are working on the same network. We all have internet that kind of talks to one another. So they have showed that there are ways to achieve this. And I think what we're really trying to do is wherever there is a precedent, or wherever someone has done something that can literally be lifted and shifted, please tell me if I've missed anything. If there's something you think is abundantly obvious and should just be reused, tell me, and I will push it. I'm not an inventor. I don't need to own everything. I just want the sector to move forwards. So that's, please do shout if you see any opportunities for reuse of expertise or tools.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll some of the work that the BSI AMT4 committee do, that covers some of the work in this space. So I'll send you a link, send you some information later on that one.
Yeah, great.
Just looking at other questions coming through. One that's looking, say, we've only seemed to only talked about the electricity supply. Where do other energy supplies, so gas, biomass, etc., fit into the data landscape?
Yeah, so to simplify it down, because I was assuming this was a mixed audience, I focused on electricity because it's kind of feels tractable. Gas is definitely part of this. So there are all the same problems in gas, but gas has the inbuilt advantage that there is flexibility built within the network already. So what you can do with gas is you can line pack, and you can preload the gas essentially for use later. And what that gives you is massive burst capacity compared to electricity, which has to be balanced instantaneously. There's a huge amount of challenge if you're thinking you're going to decarbonise and move away from the gas network. And we need to understand it much more effectively to be able to do that. But there's also loads of opportunities to potentially use the gas network for hydrogen or pumping other gases, other green gases. And actually, at the minute, we don't know if the gas network is up to it, because the data isn't there to tell us where the pipes are going to be capable of taking hydrogen. We know that if plastic pipes have been put in, they're probably going to be able to take hydrogen, but the old metal ones, a lot of them won't, or at least they will age a lot more quickly. So there's massive data challenges in gas. Biomass is absolutely of importance, but it's more about they're generating electricity, therefore it goes on the same networks. So whilst it's important to understand what they're doing as a generator and their capabilities as a generator, it's a kind of a part of the generation landscape in my mind. But then there's, from a personal perspective, I think there's a really interesting question around where is biomass renewable and genuinely green, and where is it not? Because we don't necessarily have the data to explain that at the moment. So there's basically there are the same challenges all across the energy sector, and they are all absolutely vital. And that includes the offshore sector as well, which is not something we've discussed today or focused on in detail, but hopefully we'll be starting to do a bit more in that area as well, to really try and bring this strategy across the whole energy landscape. Yeah,
good. Okay. So thinking also in terms of there's obviously a lot of data being gathered. So in terms of what are your thoughts about the timelines when you hope to have sufficient data to be sort of really working with it and generating quite a difference? But also then once you've consolidated all that data, what's the most critical challenge that it will help address?
So there are a lot of projects going on at the moment that all kind of coincidentally are either going to finish at the end of this year or the end of next calendar year. So I would expect to see some step changes from the start of 2021 and the start of 2022 in terms of data access and data matching, essentially being able to bring those things, bring data sets together from disparate organizations. So fingers crossed that all sort of keeps to that timeline, but in current environment, you know, there is obviously the risk that things get delayed. So that's a real challenge. I think as you start to bring all the data together, I think decarbonisation becomes less of a huge how do we decarbonise everything problem, and more of a where can we decarbonise effectively quickly, where can we pick the low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of interest in kind of local area energy systems and trying to optimize local areas, which, you know, just from an optimization point of view, my background was optimization before I came into telecoms and energy. Doing a smaller section of it, whilst you might not get a globally optimal solution, at least you might get something near the optimal for that area. You know, so you're actually going to be able to start to work towards the right direction much more effectively. And it's all about making sure we have the right kind of generation, the right kind of storage, the right kind of demand, and we're able to actually control that and balance it all effectively. There's loads of interesting research that's going on around using data science techniques to better predict when wind energy will be generated. And they've shown that they're able to maximize the value of that energy much more effectively, because you essentially take it from being a completely stochastic product that is on when it's on and off when it's off, to something you can put some level of confidence around and say, I'll sell you this energy at this time with this level of confidence. And it's much more, it can be a much more productive part of the system when you have confidence that the energy is going to arrive when you say it's going to arrive.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So I think in terms of your plea for people to provide support and provide some help, might be an interesting one here, and that there's an attendee from the Oil and Gas Authority who's saying, have you approached us to discuss collection of the information on pipelines? We may have the powers to collect what you need, ... So it sounds like there's an open door to push on there to get some more information.
Yeah, brilliant. And I am working with the Oil and Gas Authority very just starting. We had a kickoff call about 2 weeks ago. And yeah, I think the powers in the offshore oil and gas sector are really interesting, because obviously they're all natural monopolies, and the regulation is much more specific. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity there, and also a lot of opportunity to make sure that we bring together the infrastructure and we're not just duplicating effort. So when floating wind is being deployed, is it using the infrastructure that's available in the offshore energy sector, rather than just recreating it all and duplicating effort and duplicating cost as well?
Yeah, good. Okay. There's a pair of questions coming that I think probably work quite well together. So is there already a particular vision or plan about what kind of organisation and governance and ecosystem is required? And the related question is the fact that a lot of the data in the sector is under the control of large incumbents. So how can startups get access to that data to innovate and create new products similar to PSD2 in finance?
Okay, great questions. So Ofgem are the regulator in the domestic energy sector. They are really, so they have a very brilliant head of data who is really making some big changes and some big strides towards really getting hold of this problem. So, you know, we have really good support from the regulator and also from BEIS, the government department. So in terms of governance, I don't know what the ultimate solution should look like. I don't know if Ofgem should increase its remit to start thinking about data. I don't know whether there should be a data regulator across all of government, because these problems aren't just energy sector problems, they are everywhere. So I'm not a policy and legal expert, so I won't guess which I think is the right solution, but there will be something, and it's probably beyond my pay grade. On the incumbent problem, that's exactly what we were trying to solve. So this presumption of openness puts a burden on the holder of data to say why they shouldn't share it. Now, if you're a regulated monopoly, actually the reasons for not sharing that data have to be pretty compelling, because you, just from a competitions perspective, you really have to be making sure that you're giving everyone equal access to that, and you're making it available in a fair and equal way. But equally, there are mechanisms that you can use today as an innovator to request data. So if you go to an incumbent at the moment, if they are a licensed incumbent, you can go and quote the environmental information regulations. You can ask a specific question. You can ask for a data set in a particular format. They don't necessarily have to give you that, because if it's going to cost them, I think the nominal amount they say is more than £600, which is obviously, it's kind of so arbitrary. But essentially, if they could do it in one man day to export the data for you, they should be doing that, essentially. And if they can't, they still have to respond to you and tell you why they can't, and that gives you a door to push on to say, well, maybe we can come and help you with that. Or, what happens if many people request the same thing? So there are definitely ways that innovators can request data and get access to it. But I think in general, what we're seeing is that organizations do want to get better at this. The incumbents do want to be better at sharing data. So if you're struggling to get access to it, please come and ask me. I may have the data and be able to give it you if it's open. I may know who to ask in the right organization, because that's half the problem. And if I don't, I'll try and unlock things for you in the background, or use some contacts that might be able to. So, please don't sort of sit there. If you've got a great idea and you can't get access to the data, do contact us and let us know.
Yeah. Okay, and just a quick plea for me, because I've been involved in some of the work around information security standards from a sort of an infrastructure perspective, and I think making the data available is fine, but you need to understand who's got the data, and just publishing it on the web for anybody to download is not a sensible move. But you need to put some kind of controls in there without making it over rigorous, and so there's a little balance to be got right there. Okay, slightly different question coming through, really, and I think we're running out of time, so there's just another couple of questions, really. So really, one is, what role will hydrogen play, green or blue? Now, I don't understand the question, but I hope you do.
So hydrogen may well play a really important role. I think particularly where you have kind of an energy positive offshore area like Orkney, it makes a huge amount of sense to kind of dump some of that extra renewable energy into hydrogen, and then use that in a better way, for kind of shipping. It kind of makes some sense. I'm not an expert in hydrogen. I'm kind of I'm a data person, so I'm guessing. But from an optimization point of view, if you are paying to curtail energy, that seems mad. You might as well do something with it. And if hydrogen's the solution, then that's great. Blue hydrogen, I'm a bit more skeptical about, because I kind of.
Sorry, for the benefit of other people. What's the difference between green and blue? Sorry.
Green hydrogen is generated with low carbon energy. Blue hydrogen has been generated by probably some hydrocarbon, so some higher carbon energy. And for me, if you want to decarbonise, you've really got to go for green hydrogen. Obviously, I think blue is basically just fossil fuels, but in a different wrapper. Yeah, but I think hydrogen is really important. It will play a part. I just don't know which bit.
Yeah. Okay. And so in terms of decarbonisation, which sort of sub areas do you think companies prioritise? So whether it's the built environment, transport, materials, and that kind of links into a question I got linked there of trying to balance the rapid changes in data and how the network is being operated with the far slower rate of change of the actual physical infrastructure itself. How do you balance some of those tensions?
So in terms of kind of areas for focus, there's a huge amount of focus going on transport at the moment. Electric vehicles, whilst obviously the uptake is a little bit slow and the infrastructure isn't quite there for a lot of people, particularly, I've had to replace a car recently. I would have loved to have an electric vehicle. just not possible for me right now. There aren't enough places to charge it in my town, so that doesn't work. But there's a lot of investment going into there. Buildings are a really interesting area that are not being addressed effectively at the moment. And some of my colleagues at the Catapult just published a really interesting kind of simple 6-point plan to really turbocharge the decarbonisation of buildings. So that's probably worth a look there. In terms of trying to balance the tension between data can potentially move really quickly and digital can move quickly, physical infrastructure doesn't. I think part of the value of data in the energy sector is making sure that you're investing in the right bits of the physical infrastructure. So there's no point ripping a cable out and putting a huge cable in if you actually could have just used flexibility on the other side of a constraint. So at the other side of a constrained cable that can't take enough energy through it at peak. You know, if you could just put a battery at the other side of it and just manage it in that way, but then spend the effort that you would have done digging up that cable to actually dig up one that's more important to, like, that's really important to get that right, because we do have a limited resource in terms of people to actually go and make these changes, the engineers, the kind of construction people that are necessary. So I kind of see data as being, yeah, potentially a lot quicker and potentially gets you some low-hanging fruit in the near term, but it also helps you make the right decisions for the big investments. Mm-hmm. Like nuclear power stations don't come about quickly. You have to know you definitely want one and you're committed. And to do that, I kind of think if you've got a really good, robust data-based business case behind it, you've got a chance of getting it through. But if not, you might struggle more.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah, I think we've just got one last question we can fit in, really, is in terms of if you like, the silver bullet really is, if there was one thing that AI could do in making net zero a realistic goal, what might that one role be?
Ooh, that's a really interesting one. So there are lots of people looking at AI and trying to apply it. So one of the most interesting things that it's been applied to so far is predicting generation output. So under certain, like, in the same way that you might have a huge model that is predicting weather transformations, you might have something similar that is able to predict the generation output of given types of generation, like solar or wind. And that's it. Making sure you have robust predictions for that is really important. That's really valuable, because it means that you're able to actually understand what different generation capacity is required on the system. It means that you have the confidence to turn off that coal power station because you know that you're going to be all right, and it also means that you can invest in the right areas of infrastructure, because you know wind is likely to generate in this kind of profile, solar is likely to generate in this kind of profile, therefore I need something that generates in this profile to complement it, or stores in this way. So I think that's really important. I think not necessarily from a net zero point of view, but from an efficiency point of view, I'm really keen to see AI applied to proactive network maintenance, predicting outages, telling networks where to effectively, or generators, where to effectively invest in their time and their effort, improving things before they break. It's something that's, happens in telecoms, but there's a massive value in doing that across other infrastructure. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So I think we've just run up to an hour now, so that's been a really interesting presentation and some engaging answers to some interesting questions, some quite challenging questions that have been posed. So thank you very much, Richard, on behalf of the Data Management Specialist Group and all of the attendees here.